Okay, we're on. So again, apologies for the delay. My computer went down, and my son-in-law, loyal as he is, came over and helped me get this set up. So I apologize for the delay. We had a simcha this week. Baruch Hashem, we had a beautiful ofruf. Next week I will not be here because Sunday there's Sheva Brachos and I'm going to be away. So Mitzvah Hashem, the next year will be in 2 weeks. But we'll continue and have in mind all the learning, and it should be a schus for all the neshamas, for the refuah, for everything that we wish for. So after a bit of research this week and Yegia, as we say, I came across at least one other location in Shas where we have this concept of Goren and Mosif and V'darshan. Remember that in our Gemara, we said that we use the concept of removing a letter, adding a letter, and rearranging, and then coming up with a sort of a new word that helps us understand the pshat. And we had that by Chomesh, because we said we took the vav and added it to Chamishi So to make it Chamishi Sov, so that would reference fifths, plural, and that would be a raya that would prove that you give a chomesh on a chomesh, because it's in plural. Whereas where we don't have the vav at the end, we have just a chamishis, then shifting the vav to the end only gives you one vav, chamishi, so it's fifth, and therefore it can't apply. So therefore we have the chilek between, for instance, we said by truma or by kachim, where it says chamishi sov, you can add the vav like by truma, but by hegdish, where it says chamishis, you can only add one vav, and that vav doesn't do anything for the plural. It only has the singular, and therefore there's not a fifth and a fifth. That's the raya we want to bring. So what we sort of postured is that a one-off? Is there anywhere else in Shas where you have that concept? So in Masechet Zevachim, having to do with korbanos, here's what I came across. Chof Heyam at Aleph, you'll take a look. There is the concept of Mishnah as nishbach hadam ala ritzba, when you do shchita and the blood falls, runs down on the floor, the osru, and if you gather it, posel. So then the Gemara goes on to explain what do you do, how do you do it with the blood. So I'm going to read from the Gemara here. Okay, the Gemara says, V'amarav, Hashochet tzorech shekabel is called domo shel por. It's important that the shochet collects all the blood from the por when he does the shchita. And where do we learn that? From a pasuk, shene'amar, it's called domo ushfoch, that you pour off all the blood, right? So since you have to get all the blood from the floor, then if it hits the floor and you haven't been able to gather it, then the Gemara says that under that circumstance, then possible. Okay, it's possible. Okay, so how do you learn it? So this is what you learn. The pasuk says midam hapor. The pasuk says midam hapor. The pasuk says it's called domo yishboch. All the blood that pours off. So, and we say ela midam hapor, right? What does that mean? So dam mehapor yikablenu. So that, in other words, by saying it midam hapor, that shows midam hapor yikablenu. Then you understand that when the blood comes off, not just that it rolls down, but you have to gather it. What's pshat? The kasava gorer masifim v'darshan, because you use the concept of gorer masifim, our concept here, right? So, in other words, by taking the yud, okay. By taking the yud off, we say midam hapor yikablenu, from the blood of the por, of the animal, of the cow, of the bull, he receives it, right? So therefore we say gorer masifin v'darshan that okay. So originally it read dam hapor yishpoch, and we say me hapor. So in other words, once you take that letter and move it over, then the blood that comes out should be gathered, and that's how we know that all of the blood is gathered. Then, otherwise, if it falls on the ground, then it's possible. So we see this concept. We're not alone, that from the words itself, you can't quite make out what you should do. But if you rearrange the letter and put the letter from the first word on the back of the second word, then you have the clearer interpretation of what you have to do. So we're not alone. And again, it's not a concept that's widely used in Shas. This is the only other place I came across it. I'll continue to look, but I'm not sure that it exists in another place. But we'll see. But we see here that the Gemara says the same concept of Gored and Mosifin helps us understand the whole text. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll go back to our Gemara, and we're at the point here where we're trying to understand, again, in final, what the halacha is, and whether or not we left off, but the Gemara says that we want to understand. Rabbi Shiur ben Levi, we said last week, gave us a concept, and he said that, to make it very clear, he said, Rishon Mosif Chomesh, Al Hegdish Rishon. In other words, on a first Kedusha, you can add a Chomesh. Al Hegdish Sheni, a Mosif Chomesh. But on a second, in other words, a derivative, a second Hegdish, or second Kodesh, one level below the first, you don't add a Chomesh. So that was a concept that we wanted to apply to our Gemara, and we said that's why by Hegdish, if you follow Rabbi Shiur ben Levi, that Hegdish is not like Truma, and you can't and you're not required to give a fifth on a fifth for Hegdish. So that's how we left it. So now the Gemara here, about a little more than 2/3 down, says, Tana Tamek Rabbi Eliezer. A Tana learned in front of Rabbi Eliezer. It's about maybe 10 or so lines from the bottom, maybe a little bit more, towards the end of the line. Tana Kamed Rabbi Eliezer. So we started out by saying this: the dialogue was between a Tana and Rabbi Eliezer. So the following was learned by this Tana in front of Rabbi Eliezer. Right? Because remember, Hegdish can apply by a behemoth tar and by a behemoth tameya. In other words, if you have a behemoth tameya, an unkosher, unclean animal, and you want to give it to Hegdish will accept it, because there are certain services in the Beis Hamikdash that you can even have a non-kosher, as long as you're not slaughtering it and eating it or anything, then a behemoth can do pulling and schlepping and whatever you need to do. So you can have a behemoth tameya. So it says in behemoth tameya pada be'erkafa, and if he wants to redeem a behemoth tameya and take the money and bring it to Yerushalayim, right? So what does he do? The Torah says that he can do that, and you redeem it to erkacha according to its value, whatever on the market will bear for behemoth tameya, which may be less than a kosher animal, because for behemoth tameya there may not be the same demand, but he can collect the money, and you add a chomesh, you add a fifth. Okay, so the Torah says ma behemoth tameya miyuchedes. Just like a behemoth tameya is miyuched, means it's special. Why? So here, shetchilasa hegdish, because in its onset, it can carry hegdish. It can become kodesh, v'kula l'shamayim, and the whole thing is l'shamayim. So here, let's understand what he means. V'kula l'shamayim means that if you take a behemoth tameya, if you take a behemoth tahora and you slaughter it and you give it to the Beis Hamikdash, there are parts of an animal that you are allowed to eat. In other words, let's say you give it as a shalom or as a thanks offering, a toda, you give it to the Mizbeach, but you're allowed to eat portion of it. So in other words, it's not kula l'shamayim, it's mostly l'shamayim, but you have a chelik in it. A behemoth tameya, if you redeem a behemoth tameya,
There's no such thing as, okay, 3/4 of it is code is for the base of Mikdash, and I get a portion. You can't get a portion of a behemoth tameya. There's nothing from that behemoth tameya that comes to you. So the Gemara is saying as follows: Ma behemoth tameya, just like a behemoth tameya, if you redeem it, shetchila hegdish, that it carries what we call the higher level, not sheni but arishan. If it calls kula hegdish, B'kula shemayim, and the whole thing goes to shemayim, meaning there is nothing left over for you, right? Umolimba, and if you wind up, let's say, involuntarily using that animal, then you're chayiv in me'ilah, and me'ilah is a principle that if you use something that is l'shemayim, then you have to return it, give a chomesh and a carbon. So me'ilah, separate from everything we're talking about, also has a chomesh. And me'ilah means that you have accidentally used something that is kodesh. You weren't aware of it. You used it, and someone said, oh, you just ate hegdish, or you used hegdish. So you're chayiv, the me'ilah, you're chayiv to return it. Its value you have to return, and you have to give a chomesh and a carbon. So what do we say by behemoth tameya? That it's kodesh, kula shemayim, umalin bo. And if for some reason you diverted this unclean animal for another purpose, then you're chayiv on top of that for me'ilah, meaning you have to return it and give a chomesh. So if that happens to be a tameya, afkol shetchila hakodesh, and now we're going to learn from that as a concept that anything that has initial hegdish, initial kodesh, v'kula l'shamayim, and all of it goes to heaven, molin bo, that you then have to give, you have to give a carbon me'ilah, and you have to give a chomesh. So, in other words, what we want to learn from here, from behemoth tameya, is that you have to have several factors for this to happen. What are the factors? Remember, this, as in contrast to behemoth tahora, a behemoth tameya is kula kodesh, kula l'shamayim. It's kodesh, just like a behemoth tahora, but it's kula l'shamayim. It's all for shamayim, as opposed to a kosher animal, which is not all l'shamayim, because that you can possibly eat a portion of the carbon. So this is going to be the concept, behemoth tameya of all things, is going to be the concept that we're going to learn this whole theory about, right? So then, this is what the Tana said to Rabbi Eliezer. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer the Tana. So then Rabbi Eliezer said back to the Tana, okay, Bi shloima kula l'shamayim. I understand that when you say everything is to heaven, which means that you can't get any part of it, L'mu'ute kachim kalim, all right? So on the surface, this comes to exclude kachim kalim, which is what I said. Kachim kalim is when you give a carbon that you can partake in. In other words, it isn't everything l'shamayim, it's part l'shamayim, and or most l'shamayim, and a part to you. So I understand when you say l'shamayim that you're excluding kachim kalim, which isn't all l'shamayim, right? Given islay l'balim begavei, since by kachim kalim the owners have a chelek, then I would say less be me'ilah. In other words, the whole concept of me'ilah is if you have both of those qualities. It's what? You have to say, first of all, that it is kodesh, right? Shetchila hegdish, that it's kodesh, which it is, and there has to be kula l'shamayim. Once you have both of those, then molin bo, you can have me'ilah. What does that mean? If you have both of those concepts, then if you accidentally use it, then you have to return it with a chomesh. Okay, fine. Ella, tchilas hegdish. But if you have something that is tchilas hegdish, right? That is hegdish, lemute mai. What? In other words, it's not kula l'shamayim. So what does it come to exclude, right? So huda is say me'ilah. Then you have me'ilah. So it's hektish. But if you have an item that is meaning a second, less by me'ilah. then you have no secondary Chiyav Ameila. So Eliezer is asking a question on the Tana. You want to learn the whole concept of Kodesh from Behemoth Tameya, but you're telling me by Behemoth Tameya there are two things you have to have in order for it to be a Kodesh. Number one, it has to be Tchilas Kodesh, and secondly, it has to be Kula L'Shemayim. Then flows from that you can have Me'ilah, that you can have this whole concept of Me'ilah. Okay, fine, that I understand. But that only applies to something that has both of those qualities. It has Tchilas Hegdish and it has Kula Shemayim, right? But what are you going to tell me if what are you going to tell me if you're going to say that Tchilas Hegdish, that if you have something that has initial a Kodesh, right, but not anything else, then Lamute Mai. What are we excluding? In other words, the point is, anytime we learn something, that comes to exclude something else. And we see that all over Shas, that whenever you learn a head note, you learn a principle, there's always an exclusion to the principle, virtually in every, some kind of an exclusion. So if you're going to tell me that all I have is Tchilas Hegdish and nothing else, then Lamute Mai. What are we excluding? I mean, everything is Kodesh, right? So therefore, we have to learn that, you know what we're excluding? Who the Ispe Me'ilah, if it's Tchilas Hegdish, right? Forget about L'Shem Shemayim, the Kula Shemayim. Just from the word Hegdish, I say who the Ispe Me'ilah, then I can have Me'ilah, meaning that if someone does accidentally, that he has to give a chomesh and a carbon. But choif hagdish, secondary, less be me'ilah. In which case, now we have a proof to Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, because Rabbi Shimon ben Levi is the one who wanted to make a chilik between hagdish rishon and hagdish sheni, and then we said, well, where do you learn that from? How can you? In other words, where's the principle? So Rabbi Lezer is saying, you know what? Here it is. We see that if we learn Kodesh from Behemoth Tameya, then we're able to distinguish between Hegdish Rishon and Hegdish Sheni, because by a normal carbon, not Behemoth Tameya, by a regular Behemoth Tahora, then there is no such thing as Kol L'Shemayim, right? Because it's not Kol L'Shemayim. In which case, and we said that you have to have both in order to have Me'ilah. So if you don't have both, you don't have Me'ilah. So therefore we see Rabbi Shimon Levi was right when he said, you know, there is a distinction between Hegdish Rishon and Sheni. Hegdish Rishon requires Me'ilah. Hegdish Sheni does not require Me'ilah. And that's a proof to Rabbi Shimon Levi. We were trying to say, no, Rabbi Shimon Levi isn't right. Where does he get this concept to separate Hegdish Rishon and Hegdish Sheni? And we're saying we see it from this Gemara, from our interpretation, that we learn the whole thing from Behemoth Tameya. So Behemoth Tameya, the characteristics are that it's Hegdish and Kula Shemayim. Only from that can you say that the mitzvah of Me'ilah or the inyan of Me'ilah applies. But when you don't have both, which is normally by Behemoth Tahora, let's say most dedications are not Behemoth Tameya. Most dedications are Behemoth Tahora. So a person sells the animal, takes the money, goes to Yerushalayim, buys something, and goes to the Beis HaMikdash and gives the carbon. But then he eats part of it. So if he eats part of it, then you no longer have Kol L'Shemayim, then you can't have Me'ilah. If accidentally someone eats, from that carbon, from what was supposed to be on the carbon, then there's no Me'ilah. So now we see it. Clear difference between Hegdish Rishon and Hegdish Sheni. It's a brilliant concept of how he comes about to say this is a proof to Rabbi Shimon ben Levi by using the difference between dedicating a Behemoth Tameya or a Behemoth Tahora. Okay, so that's so the Chorah is a raya. So the Gemara says no. We're still trying to say no. There's not a clear proof. Because the Gemara Dilma le'inyan chomesh ka'omra, that you know what, that we're not talking about normal me'ila, which is what we said me'ila is. Me'ila is where you accidentally eat kodesh and then you have to bring a chomesh and a carbon. We're not talking about that me'ila. So Dilma, Le'in chomesh ka'omret, we're referring to me'ila, not the principle of me'ila that you have to give a carbon and all, but only to the chomesh part of me'ila. Now, me'ila means that you accidentally ate kodesh, you have to return an equivalent value, give a chomesh, and give a carbon. So that's the whole inyan of me'ila. He says, no, we're not referring to this whole concept of me'ila, and then we want to show that it works for a behemoth tameya, not for behemoth tahora. So so he says, you know what? Maybe we're referring only to the chomish part. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and if you say it's only the chomish part, then it's consistent with Rabbi Shua ben Levi's principle, who says that a chomish can apply only to kodesh, kodesh rishon, meaning the original kodesh, and not kodesh sheni, not a secondary. What's the secondary? The secondary is the chomesh. So therefore, he wants to make a raya that you don't, in any case, you don't bring a fifth on a fifth, because that second chomesh is what's called derivative. It's secondary kodesh. It's not the initial kodesh. So on the initial kodesh, you can give a fifth. On a derivative, you can't. So he says, if you focus only on the chomesh, not on the whole inyan of me'ila. Why does he say that? Because if you focus on the whole inyan of me'ila, then you can't get away from the fact that we see that you give a chomesh regardless. So if you give a chomesh regardless, then that can't necessarily prove Rabbi Shua ben Levi's point. But if you focus only on the chomesh portion and you say that we're only dealing with the chomesh, and then that Gemara tells us, yes, on a kodesh rishon you give chomesh, on a chomesh, on a kodesh sheni you don't give a chomesh on a chomesh. So he wants to split hairs and say that that's how you have to learn pshat. Because normally we would learn me'ila, we say, okay, me'ila is me'ila. So he says, no, we don't mean me'ila in its regular sense, but we focus only on the chomish part, and then it can come out like a Bishua ben Levi. So then the Tana who was learning to Rabbi Lezer, Amalei in Hachib Kamina. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. In other words, he was concurring with Bishua ben Levi's interpretation that what we're talking about here is just the chomesh, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi can be justified by saying this concept. What's the upshot? The upshot is that now we see by Hegdish, unlike Truma, where you automatically give a chomesh and a chomesh, that by Hegdish, we don't really do that because we only give the chomesh on the original kodesh, meaning on the actual dedication of the animal, of the carbon, but you don't give a chomesh on a chomesh because we say that the gabi chomesh, you have to have only the original and not the secondary. So that's how he justifies Rabbi Shua ben Levi's interpretation of what is the difference here between Hegdish and Truma. And so the bottom line is that Truma, there's a chomesh and a chomesh. Masa Sheni, Masa Sheni, there's no discussion, but the halacha is that on Masa Sheni, you do give a chomesh, even though there is no reference to chomesh. In other words, we can't learn from Masa Sheni itself whether you give a chomesh. And from Hegdish, you don't give a chomesh. And of course, halacha l'maisa, it doesn't matter because we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, we don't have Truma either. But at least from this understanding, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you would only give a chomesh on the actual carbon, on the original amount. But if for some reason a person didn't fully give the chomesh, like we said, because you can give the chomesh later, you don't have to give it at the same time. And there's leeway to give the chomesh, and if you don't fully give it for a period of time, then there's no sort of penalty of a chomesh on a chomesh. You just have to wait it out. And why do we say that's okay? And we go back to what the Gemara said, because the Gizber Hektish, the treasurers of the Hektish will never let go. They'll pursue you until they get it. So if it's by a private, hand, then who's going to pursue? Then we say, you know what? We're going to penalize you chomesh on a chomesh because you may be derelict and not pay. But by Hegdish, we're never worried about it, because the treasurer of the Hegdish will always knock on your door, even months later or whatever. It says you owe a chomesh and you have to give that chomesh. So that's how the Gemara ends here. And so we have at least some clarity as to what the halacha is on chomesh. So again, let's take a look. Rashi. We were the Rashi, I think in the wide line, we were looking at right before the wide line, Mayim Chosev V'chil Sachomesh Ma'ash Yosef Chomesh. If he's Chil Sachomesh, do you give him another Chomesh? Me or me and Heide Gabi Truma Afagav Glok Siv Chamishi Sov Tananbo Kumsha. We learned that you give a chomesh, the chomesh mishum deksiv, the yosaf. Remember, this is the gorin umosifin concept. The mashma shtei toisafos, because if you take the vav and you put it at the end, it means two, because you can't have two vavs, but you have chamishi sov, yud vav. So in tama mishum mishmatzehu hocha nami ksiv yosaf v'chayiv lahosif. O dilma, or maybe not, right? And this was the alternative interpretation, right? Tama the truma lav mishum mishmei say he ela mishum the kaimelan goren and mesifin and medarshan. So by truma we use this concept of goren and mesifin. Hilkach Yosef the gabi truma kishakale vav the Yosef. Okay, he's explaining here. V'tikre bei Yosef Chamishi Sov, right? V'shavislei Besof Chamishi Sov, Tikre Chamishi Sov v'shnei vavin v'nishtam mechamishi yos harbe. So the two vavs means a number of fifths. Therefore, we can say that what that means is to give a fifth and a fifth. Abul Hocha Gabi Hegdish. The loiksiv ela chamishis. It only says chamishis that you have to give afagaf the shakla. Even though you move it around, all you're going to have is a vav at the end, chamishi so, his fifth, and you still don't have a plural. If you don't have a plural, then you have no raya, says the Gemara from here, that you give a fifth on hegdish. The im tomar, if you're going to say nishtaya be'emtza teva chamishiyos. Okay, in other words, let's take it from the middle of the word and call it chamishiyos, right? Kesef arkacha lo lashchen goren mesifan lahafsik etzateva. So from the middle of the word, he says you can only take it and put it at the end of the word. This whole concept, like we saw in Zvachim, it only works if you take it from the beginning and from the end, but you can't put it in the middle. So he wants to say, because it says chamishis, if you put the vav after the yud in the middle of the word, you also come out with a plural. So the Gemara says, no. You can't do that. You can take it from the beginning of a word and put it at the end of a word. So the whole concept of Gorna Mosifim is something that the Chachamim introduced, right? They were the ones who created this concept. Obviously, they didn't pull it out of whole cloth. They did it. They said they understand that that's what it takes to understand Pshat, so you have to do that. But what they did is that they limited their rule to from the beginning to the end, not from the beginning to the middle. You can't take it from the beginning and put it in the middle and still come out with a plural. You can only, and that's true in diktuk. For those, if you look into grammar, you see that grammatically it's the end of the word that dictates how you interpret that word. You never look at the middle letters of a word in the Hebrew grammar and say it's a singular or it's a plural, even though you might be able to have a different interpretation. You say that's only the end of the word. That's why Gorin and Mosifin is only to the end of the word. It's a little, pedantic here, but that's how. Therefore, you can't say you take it from the beginning and put it in the middle and have a plural. Right?
So can you go from the end to the, can you go from the end
Sorry,
to the
say
beginning?
again?
Can you go from the end to the beginning or the beginning to the end?
No, only from the
No?
beginning to the end. It's a good question. In other words, we don't see it in reverse. The principle of Gorin and Mosifin starts with Gorin, meaning the first word you diminish, and Mosif, the second word. So they established the concept to go only in one direction. And again, the Chazal did it for us to understand the pshat. I mean, it's a brilliant concept, because otherwise, even in the case of the Korban and Zavachim, you wouldn't know it unless you followed a concept that makes it clearer as to how you interpret a word. So it's beginning to end, and even in grammar, since the end is what really dictates the word, so putting it at the beginning doesn't do anything. If you take a letter from the end and put it in the beginning, it rarely changes anything. It only changes something when you put it at the end of the word, because the end is what dictates the real meaning.
Yeah, excuse
right?
me. What about the trup? The trup gets really messed up. When you have a trup that belongs at the end of a word, and you take away the letter and you put it to another.
You change it. You're right.
You can't use that.
You're absolutely right.
In the replacement. So how are you allowed to drop a trup?
So you have to. You're absolutely right. It's a good question, and you have to modify the trup, because we call what's milra, milel. Those are diktuk is a little complicated, but sometimes you have an emphasis on the first part of a word or the second. So Menashe, when you lane, you realize that you have to know trup to put the emphasis on the right part of the word. So you're right here. If you remove the letter and put it at the end, that can change the trup, because you have to now emphasize not chamishi sov, but chamishi sov, and you have to go. So it's a subtle change.
No, when you have the end of the word, which has the accent, because a lot of Hebrew words, the accent is at the end of the word, and that's the part you're changing to another word. So the trup that was there can't be used as the beginning of the next word. It wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't sound right either.
Right. So so sometimes in your chumashim, when we look at our chumash, just like we have a kri ksiv, where a letter is written in the Torah, but it's pronounced as a different letter, and you see in the margin of our chumash, and the Baal Korah has to know this, that when he sees the letter, he knows that he has to pronounce it according to the kri, not according to the ksiv, not according to what's written, but what Chazal tell us is the proper reading. So if he understands that, and that's why being a Baal Korah has to have some insight, is that if you're now in this particular case, it's rare, but if there's Gorin or Mosifin, if you move the letter around and it becomes a letter at the end, then you have to understand that that's the way you have to read it, and that the trup has to if it changes the trup, the emphasis has to be in the not in the written letter, but in the letter that you read. But it's rare. The thing is, Jay, it's rare. You don't have that like all the time. So in those few occasions, the Baal Korah has to know that it's the kri, not the ksiv. And when we read it, and we look at it, sometimes we pay attention, sometimes, the Baal Korah reads it right through, and you're not recognizing it. But if you stop to realize, and because the Chumash tells us right there that it's a kri ksiv, that you have to, then you have to adjust the way you hear it, because hearing is part of the mitzvah in the Torah. You have to hear it as the proper letter, not the letter that's actually written in the Torah. It's a little complicated.
So they have
unfortunately happen all over.
So they have the permission to change the trup to match the shifting. So,
to match the change. To match the change.
All the trup is, in a sense, all the trup is Masorah. None of it's in the Torah. So in fact, they say that in the I know there's at least one opinion that in the original Torah, as Moshe wrote, there wasn't even necessarily spaces between words. So a lot of this has to do. It's all Masorah passed down as far as the vowels, the trup,
Right.
the accents, which is indicated by the trup, and so on.
But that's what I'm saying. All of this stuff is Torah Shabbat Peh, how you read it and how you write it.
Right.
That changing the letters in the Sefer Torah directly.
No, that's right.
They're moving the letters
in fact,
in the cloth.
Yeah. So I helped publish a sefer from Rabbi Aaron Lopiansky, and it's a beautiful sefer which is dedicated to understanding trup. It really is a beautiful sefer. It goes through every parsha and explains to us from the different mefarshim what how you read something. So again,
let's give one more example. Actually, we just had the Shabbos, and we have it also in Yisro, where we have two
on
totally
the
different,
right?
On the Sarah Dibros, we have two separate sets of trup, and it's also then how the psukim are split and so on. So it's and in the case of the Sarah Dibros, both of those are considered proper, but for different uses.
That's correct. So in other words, when you're following their Sarah Dibros, and you hear the Balkore, and you're sensitive to the trup, and you see that he's not following the trup that's in the Chumash, that's because the Masorah is, as Nasha said, that when you read their Sarah Dibros, you read it with a different flow, and it's not necessarily the trup that is the normal trup that's read in our Torah. And again, you're right. So the Chachamim have to really carefully interpret how we best understand the Torah. Otherwise, you're reading it like a book. You're just reading word for word without any intonation. And the beauty of the Torah is the intonation. When you recite it, a good Baal Koreh really gives us a very precise understanding, and he's makbid in the grammar, and he understands Bilram, Hillel, which I never got as a student of grammar in my younger years. I was totally confused on Hebrew grammar, but over the years you're picking it up when you're. But in any event, yeah.
When they changed the letters, they were not concerned about the trup being violated from the Masorah, but the attitude was, we'll fix the trup once we agree that we change the letters. We shift the letters around. So the trup becomes secondary to the actual letters.
Yeah. Well, the trup helps us understand. It's sort of an aid to us. It's not. It doesn't usurp. If someone didn't know how to lane and he wanted to review Mavra Sedra, he wanted to review the Sedra, and all he could do is read. He doesn't know trup. Then he knows the word, and you read the words of the Torah without any intonation, because you don't really know how to read it. But at least every word of the Torah is read properly. It's when the Baal Koreh then takes the tune and he sort of puts it all together that it really becomes a melody to our ears, because then we have the beauty of the Torah in the way it was supposed to be read. But that all came after Mountain Torah. When Moshe gave the Torah to Sinai, he didn't read it with trup. He didn't tell us this is the way you learn Torah. So it really has a beauty of its own. But look at the end of Rashi, because Rashi here, he quotes the Gemara in Zavachim that I just read before, the beginning. He says, "V'lokach midam hapor," and you take from the dam hapor, dam mehapor yikablenu. You see what he does? He says, "V'lokach midam hapor," and then he takes the mem from dam, and he puts it. Now, in this case, it's not at the end of the word. In our case, it's at the end of the word, chamishisov. Here, he takes it from the first word to the second word, which is okay. You can't go in reverse, Rick, the way you were asking. You can't go from last to first, but you can go from first, and he puts it at the beginning of the word, not at the end of the word. He says, Dam meha par, the blood from the par, yikablenu, which gives us a clearer understanding that it means you have to collect all the blood and you can't let it slip down on the floor. Because the way it says "Lakach medam par," you could say, you know what, I'm gonna shech the par. The blood will spill out, and I'll pick up all the blood. I'll make sure all the blood from the floor is then collected. Why not? It doesn't say that it has to be untouched. The blood fell. I got it. It's all there. It's stainless steel. It's not going anywhere. I'll make sure to vacuum it all up, and I'll have all the par. So he says, no. Dam meha par yikablenu, that the change of the letter means that you have to collect it directly from the par. You can't let it fall down and then pick it up after it falls down. That's how that one letter changes our understanding of what the meaning of the when the Torah says it, how you shecht and how you what you do with the blood of the animal once you shecht it. So that's the other example. And again, it's the original Gemara is in Zavachim. It's just quoted again in Yuma, but the original Gemara is in Zavachim. Okay. So continue Rashi. Typically, makam aboy le'lerava. Typically, the imchazer v'chila asachome sharishon. What he means to say is that if you are mechalel the chomish harishon, a mosif chomish, you don't add a chomish to have a hegdish sheni. That's the Rabbi Shua ben Levi. That's not hegdish sheni. I feel a chazer v'chilul karen atzmo shetofis tachas harishon ein mosif chomish. So he goes on to say that even if you consecrate the actual karen, the principle itself. In other words, you consecrated it, you owe a chomish, then you want to consecrate it again for some reason. I'm not sure why that would happen. That you don't say, okay, now I give another chomish. So in other words, once you give a chomish, that's it. There's no more chomish on top of it, and you give it one time. Okay, you don't give it a second time. There was the ein chomish and chomish. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi Shua Levi says in the Brisa, the Yalaf lo mikra mishmaisa chomish tchilas hegdish dami shaharim me'elav mitusav v'lo nispases tachas harishon hilkach boin mitam chechach ba'ayin mitam the hegdish sheni lo tefshetle mishum hachi. So then that's Rabbi Shua ben Levi's interpretation why you give it from the first and not the second. Matzvah zeh tachas harishon shahaseni nitfas b'kedusha shel acher below machmas atzma bolo. So in other words, you have to have original hegdish that you can have, but secondary hegdish, again, we said it in different words. V'im behemet tameya habalei lemichta v'im behemet tameya v'im behema mahi lahachi kama. This is what we mean. So you add a chomesh from behema tameya because we said you have those two principles. Ma behema tameya tchelas hegdish lekami parach milo mashkachas le'nami shetei hegdish sheni shittisena lebedek habayis tachas bedek habayis hacher. The kula l'shamayim, and you have to have the whole thing dedicated to shamayim. She'ein lebalim bo klum, because by behema tameya there's no claim. You can't have anything but right. It's not hegdish behema tameya lebedek habayis he. So there's no way that you can have a part of that behema tameya because the whole you dedicated to hegdish. U'moel in bo hashtakol kasol kadafas the male the meila mamish komer. Here in the beginning we thought we were talking about meila mamish. And we said, okay, that's very difficult. The call logo meila mishtoi because it's not speaking by meila. Bo dafilu lesgabe kolhani shaykha male le'inyan hegdish. So if you're talking about meila, then the original meila, then we understand when it says lemuute, right? Then. What are you excluding? You're excluding a case where you don't have kol l'shamayim. That we understand. But by regular hegdish from behemoth tahora, you don't have that. So Gemara says, Dilma in Chomish Ka'amritz. We're not really speaking about Me'ilah. We're speaking about the focus on the Chomish portion. Hach Me'ilah, Lav Me'ilah Mamish. It's not talking about the Me'ilah the way we understand it. We're not talking about having Hanov in a Hekdesh. Chomish Ka'amr. Let's focus just on the Chomish, right? All right. And if we're focusing on the Chomish, and you're coming to redeem Kodesh, the Chomish Me'ilah. And we're calling that Chomish Me'ilah. Not the whole animal is being moel. Only he wants to say that when it says Me'ilah, you can refer to the Chomish. How can you do that? Because the Me'ilah is on the whole thing. So he says, Chomish Me'ilah. That when the Gemara meant, when he said Me'ilah, he meant it only on the Chomish. Shem the Me'ilah nami shayef Chomish, because there is a Chomish, a fifth by Me'ilah, l'mu'ute hegdesheni also, and it comes to exclude hegdesheni kedabi Shurban Levi, like Shurban Levi. So the Gemara now explains to us, right, that's how the soul of this comes out. That hegdesheni, you don't have a chomish, but hegdesh rishon we have a chomish. So again, we're at the point now where we said the halacha comes out of Shurban Levi, but halacha l'maisa we see it's different. It's not halacha l'maisa, because halacha l'maisa we said that even Manasseh Sheni, where there is no reference at all to any respect of chomesh, we say you have to give a chomesh a Manasseh Sheni. But at least in the time of the Gemara, this is the way they interpret it, that Truma you have a chomesh, Manasseh Sheni you don't have a chomesh, and by Hegdish you have a chomesh only by Hegdish Rishon and not by Hegdish Sheni. So we'll stop here, and Mitchum will pick it up in 2 weeks from Nun Hey Amid Aleph. So thank you very much for your